want to tell you about my teachers today. When I was growing up in Taiwan, I had a wonderful teacher named Sylvia Lee. Miss Lee taught me a lot about fundamentals in violin playing, technique, bow arm, left hand, intonation, or the importance of intonation. And when I was 12, I left Taiwan to go to Australia. And in Sydney, Australia, I was taught by Robert Pickler, a Hungarian musician whose pedigree is quite impressive, that he was a student of János Hubay, and he had come from a long tradition of great musicians in Central Europe. So my musical lineage actually traces all the way back to Joachim, because Hubay was a student of Joachim, and Mr. Hubay taught Mr. Pickler, who in turn taught me. But perhaps the most influential teacher in terms of my violin development was Dorothy DeLay, who was my teacher at the Juilliard School from my age of 15 to 21. Now, what is so important about Ms. DeLay's teaching in terms of my development? Well, she taught me a lot about violin technique, but I think the most important lesson I learned from her is how to analyze my own playing, or how to break down one's playing, because for Ms. DeLay, nothing was too difficult to analyze. She was perfectly able to break down the playing of a mediocre student, and she could analyze great concert violinist playing down to the same minute detail. You can break the violin playing into components: bow arm, and if so, bow arm, which part of the bow arm, bow grip, bow direction, bow speed, bow pressure, sounding point, etc. And then on the left hand, there's finger pressure, shifting, vibrato, and the intensity of the vibrato and the speed of vibrato. And so for her, the sky was the limit. Anybody can really play well as long as the fundamentals are laid down. And of course, the interpretive side will depend on and the sonic side will depend on talent. But for me, that sort of sense of optimism and that there's no obstacle too difficult to conquer, it was a very important lesson for me. And so the wisdom that I learned from being with Mr. Lay, it really was about being patient, about being patient with one's development. I'm a sometimes impulsively impatient person, and sometimes I want to see progress in my own students at the same rate that I expect of myself. But I have to remind myself that there's always that possibility one can develop at one's own pace. And that was Mr. Lay's, I guess, her modus operandi. And just to close with a very, very funny way of describing Mr. Lay. When I was 13, I encountered Itzhak Perlman for the first time in Sydney, and I played for him in a master class. And in the class, he began to describe his two teachers, Ivan Galamian and Dorothy DeLay. And he clearly loved Miss DeLay. And he started to describe her, calling him or other students Sugar Plum, very endearing terms. And later, I did hear her say, calling her student Sugar or Sweetie or Sweetheart. And it was very unusual. It was very maternal. And she never raised her voice with any of my classmates, nor myself. But I think she relied on persuasion. And so when I would go in and play a lesson rather badly, or if I'm not really prepared as I should have been, her euphemism was that, okay, sweetie, I think this piece is going to be very good for you. And at first I thought, gee, I got away with it, She didn't realize how badly prepared I was. Then I later found out gradually that she really meant that, I'm not quite prepared and I really should go home and work some more. And that was her nice way of telling me that the lesson really was just awful. And if I play out of tune, the famous saying of Mr. Lace, of course, is, instead of saying, gee, that intonation is just really bad, and she will say, okay, sweetie, what's your concept of an F sharp? And so that became the model, if you want to call it that, of all the delay students. What's your concept of an F sharp? So here it is, my brief description to you about one very influential teacher in my musical and violin development, Dorothy DeLay.